die for the causes they believe in. In the early 70s, a San Diego student burned himself to death protesting the Vietnam War. In the 1960s, many Buddhists burned themselves to the stake in order to protest the injustices of Southeast Asia. In 2001, several Muslim extremists hijacked airliners and crashed them in the World Trade Center to inflict damage on a nation they considered an enemy to their religion. The apostles thought they had a good cause to die for, but they were stunned and disillusioned when that good cause died on the cross. These words are said by Josh McDowell in his book, More Than a Carpenter, making the point that when we consider religion, we consider faith, it is something, a belief that we are willing to die for because we know that it's true. It's something that we are not going to give up on. For the apostles, they saw that truth, but then that truth died. And they're like, I don't know, this isn't true. How can our Savior die? If death can defeat him, how do we know that we will not be defeated? When we consider this draws to light the resurrection, which today I'll be addressing in the question, why is the resurrection essential to the Christian faith? And in today's speech, I hope I clearly portray that it is essential to the Christian faith because it shows three important truths about our Savior. And by such truths, we have a message worth dying for. And with that, let's begin. Let's look at the first truth. He conquered. When we consider the idea of the resurrection, it is the idea that Christ conquered death. This is prophesied by the prophet Hosea and Isaiah. But in Hosea 13:14 it says, I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be your plagues. O grave, I will be your destruction. Hosea saw a vision of the Messiah conquering what no man could ever conquer before. It was the unconquerable. It was death itself. Revelation 1:18, when John sees the vision of Christ, Christ says, I am he who lives and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys to Hades and death. Through the resurrection, we have the assurance that nothing will hold us back because nothing is too hard for God's strength. That through the resurrection, we see that we are able to conquer anything in our lifetime. William Gurnall once said, Christ never lost a battle, even when he lost his life. And when we understand the idea of the resurrection, not only do we see the idea of him conquering, but we see that it sets him apart from all other contenders, which is the second point today. When we consider the resurrection, Christ outmatched. He outmatched any contender that wishes to try to be above him. Let's take a look at some of the main religions, Islam and Buddhism. When we consider Islam, their main figure is the Prophet Muhammad. Now, he was born around 570, died 632. And we look at Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, and he was born around 563 BC and died around 483 BC. But look at the consistency in these major figures. They died. They don't live anymore. But by the resurrection, our truth, our Savior, our figure lives today. Nothing holds him back, that he is currently living. That through the resurrection is essential to our faith because we know that what we believe in is not dead, but alive, and alive forevermore. 1 Corinthians 15:20 says, But now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep. Rabbi Zacharias, in his book, Jesus Among Other Gods, looks at this idea and says, Jesus gave the greatest proof of his authority by accurately predicting his death in the time of his bodily resurrection. The fulfillment of that prediction reveals the uniqueness of Jesus above all contenders. When we look at the resurrection, not only did Christ conquer death, but he outmatched any contender that wishes to try to succeed him. Because Christ is God and he is alive and not dead. But then from that prediction, it brings the last and most important point. He left the world without excuse. In John chapter 2, when Christ drove all the money changers and flipped all their tables out of the temple, the Jews looked at him saying, Where do you get such authority for this? Show us a sign. Christ was fed up. He was giving all these kind of signs. And so he says, the greatest sign I will give you is to destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it again. You see, he was predicting his death. Not the physical temple, but the temple of his body. It even says in John chapter 2, he was speaking of the temple of his body when looking at this idea of his statements. When we understand this concept, the resurrection leaves the world without excuse. If Christ did not rise from the dead, he is just one of the many. There's no difference. He was withheld from the greatest enemy of man, which is death itself. And the world has no reason to pay attention to him. But because he resurrected, but because he conquered the unconquerable, and because he outmatches any contender, the world now has a choice to believe it or to ignore it. This is why the resurrection is essential to the Christian faith. But bring us all together. Let's take a look at what we talked about today. We first saw the idea of Christ conquering what no man could conquer before. That through the resurrection we know we don't have to fear anything, even death itself, because Christ conquered it all, and through him we are more than conquerors. And when we look at the second point, it's that he outmatched any contender. No one comes close to our God. No one comes close to our Savior because of the resurrection. And lastly, we saw through these truths, he left the world without excuse. That now is the time to choose. Now is the time to live for Christ or to run away from him. But I say all this to bring us last point. As I open with Josh McDowell talking about so many people dying, going to the stake for their faith, I hope I show you today this truth. When we consider the resurrection, the essentiality of its purpose to our faith, we know that Christ conquered the unconquerable. He left the world without excuse. He outmatched. And those three truths give us, as believers and followers of Jesus, a message worth dying for. Thank you.